Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, the future of Iran at a key turning point after more than 2 weeks of nationwide protest, with the number of protesters killed potentially reaching into the thousands. But Iranians are not backing down. Now, throughout Iran and the Middle East, the focus is also on President Donald Trump to see what steps he will take next. The pastor of a Bible-believing church in Germany facing government harassment, including physical assault. We'll show you what happened and how the church is still thriving. And here at home, the move for a new memorial in our nation's capital for an historic president and his family. All those stories and more right now on CBN NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
It is Monday, the 12th of January. We're going to begin this half hour with those protests in Iran, where the future and fate of the country hangs in the balance. The streets have become killing fields as opposition leaders say Iran's Revolutionary Guard has killed thousands of people. Now the people of Iran are waiting to see how President Donald Trump will act. Chris Mitchell brings us the story. He's reporting from Jerusalem.
In Tehran and other cities throughout Iran, Republican Guard troops are firing indiscriminately into the protest crowds. Many Iranians are going to hospitals to identify their loved ones. In the meantime, the regime's opponents are looking to President Trump. He told reporters Iranian leaders want to negotiate and a meeting is in the works. But if the government keeps killing, he may act sooner.
I have options that are so strong. So, if they did that, it'll be met with a very, very powerful force.
In Tehran, Iran's Speaker of Parliament warned that attacks on Iran would lead to retaliation against U.S. military forces and Israel. In Jerusalem, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praised the protesters.
The people of Israel and the entire world are in awe of the tremendous heroism of the citizens of Iran. Israel supports their struggle for freedom and strongly condemns the mass massacres of innocent civilians.
The latest figures from the U.S.-based human rights activist news agency puts verified deaths at around 500. But there are reports that bodies taken to hospitals could reach into the thousands.
Maria, to put it into perspective, in the last 48 hours, Iranians have suffered more casualties than America did after the 9/11 attack.
Exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi announced a new phase in the protest.
In addition to taking and holding the central streets of our cities, all institutions and apparatuses responsible for the regime's propaganda and for cutting communications are to be regarded as legitimate targets.
Pahlavi also called for Iranian forces to switch allegiance to the protesters and for Iranian embassies to replace the flag of the Islamic Republic to the lion and sun Persian flag, something this protester did at the Iranian embassy in London. Pahlavi called what's happening in Iran a defining moment.
Remember, the same thugs that hate America also hate their own people. We hope only that the Iranian people this time will be victorious, and they will be, because I know that Iranians are prepared to die for this cause, and so am I.
Lana Silk of Transform Iran told CBN News they're preparing for what may come next.
We're expecting an open Iran imminently, so that means aid, it means infrastructure, it means Bibles, it means pastors, and we need to make sure that we're ready to move in when the doors open.
For now, the people of Iran seem ready to continue their battle against a nearly 50-year dictatorship. This sign in Tehran reads, "We are no longer afraid, we are fighting."
And Chris is now with us to continue our coverage. So, Chris, what contingency plans does Reza Pahlavi have in mind for a transition of power in Iran?
Well, Ephraim, he's been preparing for this moment most of his life. He has a contingency plan, what he says is a comprehensive plan with the help of economists, scientists, jurists that would have a peaceful transition, one that would protect the citizens, one that would stabilize the economy, and then, as he says, bring Iran out into the free world with the family of nations after more than nearly 50 years of dictatorship. So it's he says that he would want to be the transitional leader, and that would lead to democratic elections and bring Iran back to what it was before 1979. It was a secular democracy, it was a monarchy right there, but that was overthrown in 1979. And so he does believe that they have prepared a comprehensive plan to take over power there in Iran. But there's still the regime has a lot of leverage, and there are people embedded in that regime that have a vested interest to make sure that the exiled crown prince does not take over. So it's a very historic tipping point for Iran. Certainly an encouragement for all believers around the world to pray for this nation.
As we heard in your piece, President Trump says he's considering some very powerful options against Iran, but he also says Iran wants to talk. Are there concerns President Donald Trump may make a deal with the Iranian regime that could allow it to remain in control?
There are concerns, Ephraim, and it depends on what kind of advice, what kind of counsel that President Trump is getting, and that's why some people are concerned that he would fall short of what some people would say is a historic opportunity. Some would compare this to President Ronald Reagan in his moment when he was at the Berlin Wall, and he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And so I think the concern is that he may not go far enough to actually make the regime fall and answer the cry of these protesters that are risking their lives on the streets. So that it remains a pivotal moment. And there could be concessions that the Iranians will make that could entice President Trump to sort of make a deal. Perhaps they would hand over the uranium, their enriched uranium, or make concessions to preserve the regime. But there was I was reading earlier today an Israeli official that said the regime will never go back to what it was before after these protests and after all the damage they've taken politically within their own population.
Chris, how are the Israeli Defense Forces monitoring the situation in Iran and preparing for different scenarios?
Well, they're saying they're monitoring very closely, obviously, and the IDF Chief of Staff says that's exactly what they're doing, preparing for any contingencies that may happen and preparing defensively for any strikes against coming from Iran. Some people think it's unlikely that the Iranians would actually have a major strike against Israel that would precipitate, a response by Israel that could be very damaging to the regime. But they are monitoring it, but defensively. And we understand, I'm sure, that there are operatives by Israel inside, but they're trying to make sure that they kind of distance themselves from being too overt, because they don't want the regime to be blaming, which it is already, blaming Israel and the United States for interfering in Iranian affairs and fomenting the protests that we see with taking millions of Iranians into the streets.
Chris, one report says Israel nearly attacked Iran a couple of times in recent weeks. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the report says that there may be miscalculations by that Iran was preparing a strike, and they really came close to a couple of times recently where there was, potential strikes between Israel and the U.S., and that there's also cooperation between the U.S. and there are operations within Israel, subversive operations within Israel, perhaps by the U.S. and Israel, to undermine the regime right now. But there had been reports that they were close to strikes twice in just the past few weeks.
Let's talk now about the church in Iran. What could it mean if the Islamic regime falls?
Well, going back to that idea of what happened with the former Soviet Union, when the former Soviet Union fell, the many ministries that had been preparing for decades went in there. And CBN was one of those ministries that went in with the gospel in a major way. And I think that's what Transform Israel is doing. Ministries like Iran Alive are preparing to go in a major way if there's this transition with the regime to bring the gospel, to help plant churches, and to build on the foundation that really has been built there over the many years, this supernatural phenomenon of Holy Spirit bringing dreams and visions to many Iranians, which has become the fastest growing church in the world.
All right, our CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell, thank you so much for your insights. As always, we look forward to hearing more from you in the days ahead this week. Coming up, a SWAT team in Germany blew the door off this pastor's house, attacked him, and broke his nose. But this persecution and more has not stopped him from preaching the gospel. And his church has grown to be the largest in the city. We're going to bring you the story when we come back. You're watching CBN NewsWatch. In Germany, Bible-believing church congregations are sometimes seen as dangerous cults. One German pastor told CBN News he's facing the worst persecution of his life. Yet despite constant harassment by police, his dynamic church is growing. Dale Hurd reports now from Germany.
Poisoned land, government opposition, and even a police assault against the pastor have not prevented this German church from becoming the largest in the city of Duisburg. The church is called Vera Forum. Vera means belief.
We always say, come to our building, touch it, and listen to the story of how it was built. Then you'll believe.
The pastor, Alexander Epp, himself an ethnic German who returned from the Soviet Union, says he never faced this kind of persecution from the KGB. This is Epp after a German SWAT team last year blew the door off his house and attacked him, breaking his nose. Why the police would do such a thing in a moment. Epp came to Duisburg as a truck mechanic in the 1980s. When the Lord put on his heart to begin an outreach to the Russian-German community here. The church outgrew its old building and finally found land for a new one, except they couldn't get a permit to build a church or get a bank loan, and the soil at the building site was found to be contaminated.
We had an expert assessment done, and the assessment showed that we'd have to invest a lot of money to remove all this soil here.
Instead of giving up, they decided to pray.
And then we stood together with the whole congregation. We held each other's hands, prayed together. God, heal the soil. And then we called in another company. They did an assessment and said the soil is clean, no toxins, nothing.
Unable to obtain a permit for a church, they became a tax-free religious organization. Without a bank loan, they built the structure themselves. Vera Forum and its 4 satellite churches are now attended by more than 1,000 people. Their services are in Russian and German. Sundays are an all-day event, with church members staying to eat a meal together and fellowship. Since only about 5% of Germans attend church, a successful church here can raise suspicions that it's a cult, using psychological pressure, forcing people to attend. Vera Forum's media department even produced a video explaining to Germans that the church is not a cult. Their website states the church leadership is transparent and accountable, and no one is forced to attend. However, last summer, the police used a former attendee's false claim that the pastor possessed an illegal firearm to launch an early morning raid on the church and on his home.
I heard this bang when they blew the door.
80 to 100 masked officers stormed the house, pointing machine guns at him.
I thought they were criminals. When I was beaten and thrown to the ground, I thought they were robbers trying to rob my house. I never thought they were the police.
Because of that, Pastor Epp tried to defend himself, and that's when a police officer punched him in the face, breaking his nose and leaving his right eye with internal bleeding. He was forcibly thrown to the floor, bloody and injured, while the SWAT team ransacked his home.
And then I just shouted, Jesus, help me.
Epp says one of the policemen then answered,
Jesus hilft dir nicht.
Jesus is not going to help you. A machine gun was even pointed at his wife Irina, who would have to be taken to a hospital from medical complications. Epp was then handcuffed and driven to the church, where the SWAT team entered with machine guns drawn, busting down doors and ransacking offices and classrooms. The police took all the church's computers. They apparently found nothing and returned them. Epp was charged with resisting the police. Epp claims the SWAT operation was launched even though the man who said the pastor had a gun admitted to a police officer before the raid that he had lied. The Duisburg police never apologized for the injuries to Pastor Epp or the damage to his home and car, and have never compensated him for his medical expenses. The authorities did not reply to our request for an explanation. Epp's son, Walter.
It seems now like a big project just to intimidate us, because we are maybe the biggest church here in Duisburg and the fastest growing.
Epp, who lived most of his life in the Soviet Union, calls it the worst persecution he's ever experienced. However, God would turn it all for good. News of the police raid has caused even more people to discover the church and start attending. Epp says all of the trouble and obstacles the church has overcome have only increased their faith.
We always had problems, and I kept asking myself, God, why? But I think it was all part of God's plan, that we'd be under pressure and that we wouldn't rely on ourselves, but on Him.
Dale Hurd, CBN News in Duisburg, Germany.
Still ahead here at home, building a memorial to a president who helped to build the country. We're going to show you the plans to honor John Adams in our nation's capital. The story's coming up right after this. Washington, D.C. is filled with monuments to American history and its leaders, and the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence is approaching. There's a move to add another memorial. This one would honor our second president, John Adams, and his family. CBN's Jenna Browder has the story.
From Washington to Jefferson, memorials to our founding fathers are an important part of our nation's capital. And now there's a push for one more, honoring President John Adams and his family.
It's important to recognize the founding family, the Adams family, who is so prolific in American history. When you think of John Adams, his son John Quincy Adams, both served as presidents. John and Abigail Adams were the first occupants of the White House.
Congressman John Molinar represents Michigan's 2nd District and has introduced the John Adams Great American Heroes Act.
And as we look at the 250th anniversary, it's really important that we look at our founding principles and celebrate that as a nation, but also recalibrate and make sure we're founding those principles in our daily lives.
The bipartisan bill extends the John Adams Memorial Commission and designates a location for the memorial. It's currently awaiting a full House vote before likely heading to the Senate and then to the president's desk for his signature.
I am so blessed to be involved in both of these endeavors.
Jackie Gingrich Cushman chairs the commission and is also the president of the Adams Memorial Foundation.
I have to say, I knew kind of the basics when I began this project, and I did not seek this out. When people ask me, like, how did you get involved? I'm always like, well, I think God has a sense of humor, because I've been involved in other things, but nothing like this.
Cushman says this year's special anniversary has heightened interest in our founders, so they're trying to raise $100 million for the project, half from private donations and the other half from the federal government. Cushman says right now the focus is on educating the public on the family's contributions to America.
John Adams was a lawyer. He was a circuit lawyer. He didn't come from money. Washington had money. Jefferson had money. He didn't have any money. Abigail, his wife, kept the farm going and provided the income they needed to survive while he served our country.
John Adams was among the strongest voices for independence from England on the floor of the Continental Congress. He pushed for Thomas Jefferson to write the Declaration of Independence and nominated George Washington to be our first commander-in-chief. Adams was our first vice president before becoming our second president, and after his defeat for a second term, became a lawmaker where he was a staunch anti-slavery advocate. Adams also wrote the Massachusetts Constitution, on which the United States Constitution is based.
One of the things I love about this project is it's a family memorial, and we don't have any family memorials. And families are so important to our country. I think it's really fitting that they be recognized as a family.
The location would be President's Park, just south of the White House.
This bill designates an area which would be near the White House. It actually is right in line of, you have the White House, you have the Adams Memorial, it would be the Washington Monument, as well as the Jefferson Memorial, all in a line. And it would recognize this founding group of leaders that have meant so much to our country.
I asked Cushman what type of design we can expect.
What we've talked about is something that's very Adams appropriate, think of it that way. So New England, so not big and huge, not a Jeffersonian, right, huge, memorial. Something that would be in keeping with John and Abigail. So maybe a library and a garden, maybe something that reflects New England architecture, but something that would be very in fitting with who they were as people.
She hopes the design phase can begin next year. For now, though, they're waiting on Congress and trying to bring in those fundraising dollars.
They are an amazing family, and it is time for us to recognize them properly.
In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Coming back with an encouraging word for your Monday. Stay with us. You're watching CBN NewsWatch. Time now for your Monday Motivation, and as we begin another week together, I want to speak life to you. Life gets better when the you want to be gets lost in the you are called to be. Think on that for a moment and draw close to the God who created you. He knows why he created you, and he's waiting patiently to reveal that to you. With that word, make this a marvelous Monday and the start of a wonderful week. Well, that is going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. You can always find more of our news programs on the CBN News channel. You can find them there at any time, as well as online at cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can email us, newswatch@cbn.com, and then come right back here and join us again tomorrow. Goodbye. God bless.